Well, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters in our common humanity, thank you for coming tonight and having me here this evening. I'd like to thank Josephine for joining me, and particularly Anne and Alberto also, who despite our profound differences, I have to praise for their willingness to engage in the battle of ideas on this subject, and for publicly standing, in fact, for the importance of that battle. Theirs is a liberal and open attitude towards controversy that is, I think, sadly remarkable amongst their ideological confreres, and especially on student campuses. On which point I would like to also thank and congratulate Bristol Students for Life for successfully organising such a controversial debate, given the current pervasive and concerning illiberalism amongst UK student unions. It's a great credit to them and to the University of Bristol, so well done, guys. On which I'd like to say the question before us, which is it moral for a woman to choose abortion? Of course, our opponents wishes to answer that in the affirmative, that it is morally permissible for a pregnant woman to choose to have an abortion regardless of her motives. And unusually, this is a moral debate, not a legal one. We're not arguing whether abortion should be legal, although the answer to that question is, I think, implicit from the way we answer this one, but whether it is morally right or wrong as a choice women make. Now, so how do we answer that question? How do we adjudicate whether this particular choice is moral? Well, in order to answer this, we have to consider how we can commonly discern how anything is moral. The answer to that, I think, is rooted in the one thing that we share in common, which Joe mentioned, which is our common humanity. We all share the same human nature with common faculties: ingestion, intellect, will, sight, etc. These faculties have purposes to them that we can fulfill in our actions, and this fulfillment constitutes our flourishing, the good for us. Okay, so let me unpack this by way of example. Reason tells me that the purpose of ingestion is nutrition. So if I flourish when I ingest moderate amounts of nutritious food. By contrast, if I have 20 donuts in front of me, I have 3, maybe 5, that wouldn't be too bad for me. But if I have all 20, I'm going to be violently ill. Okay, this is going to deny the purpose of my faculty of eating. It's going to frustrate my flourishing. So as human beings, we can know by intellect what is good for us and choose by our will whether to pursue that good. The natural purpose of our faculty of intellect is to allow us to understand the truth about things, including what is good for us given our nature. And the purpose of our will is to act in light of this understanding in favour of the good, to accomplish our flourishing. So in other words, since human nature is rational, since you and I have intellect and will, this is where moral goodness enters the picture, by virtue of our choosing the good or not. And this gives us a basic grounding of objective moral norms. Since there are purposes in our nature, the fulfillment of which constitute the good for us, this becomes moral goodness because I can choose whether to fulfill the good in my actions or frustrate it, and I am obliged axiomatically to choose the good. The good, by definition, is that which ought to be done. We all therefore have a duty to flourish according to this. So eating moderate amounts of nutritious food is therefore morally right, and gorging yourself on donuts is morally wrong. This set of principles, which we discern by natural reason, also known as common sense, applied to our human nature, is what has classically been called the natural law. And knowing this is crucial, as it enables us to consider the first of 3 elements to moral action, all of which reason tells us have to be satisfied if some act is going to be regarded as morally right. Firstly, there is the nature of the action itself. Okay? What is being chosen to be done? And this is something which, of course, the natural law allows us to discern the right towards. Secondly, there is the intention, why the actor chooses to do it. And thirdly, there are the circumstances, the context, when, where, how it takes place. Or, as I say, all of these have to be right for an action to be considered moral, that is to say, morally right. As an example, if I were married and I made love to my wife, then this would be a good action. If I did it because I love her, that would be a good intention. But if I did it in the stalls, in the middle of a matinee performance at the Bristol Hippodrome, that's a bad context. Okay? This is something which, by virtue of its circumstances, excludes the good intention and excludes the good action. If I give money to charity, that is a good action, and maybe in very good circumstances. But if I do it to gain personal glory and honour, it becomes a selfish rather than a charitable act. The bad intention spoils the good action, it spoils the good circumstances. And by extension, there are some actions that are by their very nature always wrong, regardless of the intention and the circumstances. To sexually assault someone is always wrong. Even if you are told that if you don't do it, a terrorist somewhere will shoot someone in the head, shoot 3 people in the head. There are no circumstances or intentions that can justify that act due to its inherently wicked nature. The same is true of torture or medical experimentation on an unwilling victim. Torture is always objectively wrong, even if the culpability of the torturer might be lessened due to some extenuating circumstances. This is the premise of human rights, about which I will say more in a few minutes, which form absolute protections from certain actions due to their objectively evil nature. Now, the reason I've spent half of my speech discussing basic moral theory is because this allows us to evaluate the topic of our debate this evening, which is the moral permissibility or not of choosing abortion. Given the importance of moral action, what we have to consider is what abortion is. Is it a neutral or even good action, and thus ethically uncontroversial? Or is it an action like I've just mentioned, one of those which no intention or circumstance can absolve of moral evil? What is abortion? Well, and we were discussing this in the pub beforehand, so I'll define it. What is abortion? Well, abortion is defined by the NHS on its website as the medical process of ending a pregnancy so that it does not result in the birth of a baby. Note that. The ending of a pregnancy so that it does not result in the birth of a baby. There we have the immediate intention, to stop a baby being born. Well, what about then, we've seen the intention, what about the action? Well, abortion takes place universally through the destruction of the unborn child in the womb. Early chemical abortions, which take place roughly during the first 9 weeks, though there are later forms as well, involve giving mifepristone to the pregnant mother. This blocks progesterone, the hormone produced in the ovaries which makes the endometrium, that is to say the lining of the womb, suitable for the unborn child to be gestated, that is to say supported by her mother. This breaks the baby's attachment to her mother, essentially starving, and later in the deprivation of oxygen, suffocating her to death. Surgical abortions involve destroying the body of the baby directly. Between 7 to 15 weeks, vacuum aspiration uses a powerful vacuum to suck the body of the embryonic, or more commonly fetal human being, to pieces, and from her mother's womb. From 15 weeks onwards, dilation and evacuation, D&E, involves using powerful forceps to destroy and remove the body by crushing and tearing her body apart piece by piece. After 22 weeks, to make sure that a baby is not accidentally born alive, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists actually recommends the use of what's called feticide for D&E. What's that? Well, this is when the abortionist injects a saline solution, liquefied salt, into the child's heart, which causes her to have a fatal heart attack. This is so that the baby is dead before the destruction and removal of her body can begin. And indeed, it often takes place after 18 weeks gestational age. In any case, because the later the abortion, the tougher the bones of the baby, and the more difficult she is to destroy by D&E. So killing the baby beforehand by heart attack causes her bodily tissues to soften, which makes dismembering her easier for the abortionist. This is the reality of what abortion is. That is what abortion is. So, it is the deliberate destruction of the baby in order that the baby may not be born. Is it moral to choose this? Well, the answer is surely no, of course not. Unborn babies, children in the womb, are innocent human beings, and to procure the killing of an innocent human being is wrong. Full stop. It doesn't matter the intention, it does not matter the circumstances. To procure the killing of an innocent human being is wrong. Everywhere and always. And why is that? Because like murder or poisoning or sexual crime, or indeed all the other offences against the person, to use the language of English statutory law, this is something that always violates pre-existing moral convictions that inform our political consensus, which are the rights of individual human beings. A right is a duty on the state and other members of society to not interfere with you in such a way as contradicts your fundamental flourishing. We have rights because part of our nature is that we are social animals, and we can't pursue any good, any duty to flourish, or fulfill any obligation at all if our very lives can be taken from us by others that they saw fit. The natural law we discussed earlier entails that very innocent human being has a right, a moral right, not to be killed. That is what I mean by the right to life, which is what we call a natural or human right. A right that we have by virtue of the moral norms in our rational human nature. A right that protects from and precludes the morality of all forms of unjust killing, like abortion. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, the morality of abortion is quite clear. Premise 1, it is always wrong to kill innocent human beings. Innocent human beings have a right to life. Premise 2, the choice to procure an abortion always kills an innocent human being. It violates the right to life. And therefore, conclusion, therefore it is not and can never be moral for a pregnant woman or indeed anyone else to choose abortion. In saying this, I don't judge any woman here or anywhere who has had an abortion. That is a discussion about culpability, about which generalizations are impossible and not the business of this side of the House. All we assert this evening is the missing part of the moral equation that our opponents have glossed over or ignored: the dignity and rights of the most vulnerable members of our society and the moral duty we have and owe to every member of the human family. Thank you.